Well, it's an honor for me to talk to you. I've got to say, we're talking about your film, the documentary "Butterfly in the Sky" about reading rainbow, and
Yeah.
uh, I guess the first question I have for you is, how was the project presented to you? Did you feel like this was the right timing? Had you been presented with the opportunity to do this before? And what was it about Brad and Brett that made you say, "Yeah, let's do this"?
Um, it's a great question because I don't think anyone had asked before. I
They said
think
the
they
same
were the
thing.
first. They were the first, which I think really made them stand out in the conversation about people who wanted to do a documentary about reading Rainbow. They sort of immediately rose to the top of the list, being the only ones who ever came to me and mentioned it. Plus, they had so much enthusiasm and passion, and I could tell that they grew up on the show, they loved the show, and they wanted to share the feeling that they had for the show and how it impacted their life. They wanted to share that with other people. Whether you had ever watched an episode of Reading Rainbow or not, they wanted to contribute to the historical record of the importance of this thing called Reading Rainbow, that was here for a brief moment in time, but seems to have had an impact on so many lives.
Yeah.
Um, and I thought, yeah, these guys will get it done.
Yeah, and I feel kind of weird talking about it because when Reading Rainbow started, I was filling out my college applications, and then when it ended, my daughter was born, and so we missed it. But then I asked my wife about it, and she was like excited that I was talking to you because she had watched the show, and in fact, the show introduced her to Star Trek, which was amazing. And so let me, when you first started, this is in the documentary, but when you first started doing Reading Rainbow, um, did you kind of have an idea of not only the importance of the show, but the kind of the iconic stature the show would ultimately gain?
No, I don't think anyone making a television show thinks at the beginning, boy, this is going to be iconic.
Right. But how far? I mean, because you're doing something that's to me at least was profound, was in, making reading exciting,
It
and
was
to me
certainly it was a noble pursuit without
Mhm.
question, but it took time, right? It took time for the publishers to find out about us and to recognize that when their books were on our show, sales skyrocketed. Um, it just it took teachers to recognize what we were doing and help make Reading Rainbow the most used television resource in our nation's classrooms. It took a while for us to become a part of people's lives. First during the summer months, because
Mhm.
it was created as a summer show to address the summer loss phenomenon. Um, but I think over time, it demonstrated its staying power, um, its value, certainly, and it made a mark.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that was pointed out in the documentary that I found fascinating was I think as corporate executives, we they underestimate a child's ability to critically think. They're afraid that books would encourage them to make them think that they could become wolves, or uh, and the fact that kids, the ones like my wife talked about wanting to review books on the show. What uh, was the question I had here? Yeah, it's what I found fascinating was the fact that we underestimate kids and their ability to critically think, and I think your show really pointed that out, or really illumined that to everyone.
Yeah, that kids actually do possess pretty sophisticated critical thinking skills. You know, given the right criteria around which they need to think. Um, whether you whether you see yourself as a reader or not, if you were to watch a couple of episodes of the show, you might change your idea about yourself if you put yourself in the category of I don't like to read.
Hmm.
Um, because Reading Rainbow was never about the rudiments of reading. It was about developing a love for the written word, a love
Hmm.
for stories and storytelling. And who doesn't like stories, and who doesn't like to be told stories? It's such an integral part of the human experience, exposing ourselves to stories, sharing stories, having stories told to us. Um, so I think that, at the end of the day, um, we were doing something that we felt um, was a good idea. I certainly, through my Roots experience, was already um, really tuned to the power of the medium. And when it was presented to me that we could use that very powerful engagement factor with an audience of kids and help them develop, a love for the written word, take a kid who could read and turn them into a reader for life,
Yeah.
that made a lot of sense to me.
Yeah. And
Because Roots had Roots changed the way this nation thinks about chattel slavery in America,
mhm.
right? And that's a powerful thing to witness, that
Yeah.
the 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 changing of minds and of hearts, right?
Hmm.
Roots showed us that it wasn't simply an economic institution, that there was a human cost,
Yeah.
right? And and that was a powerful shift in consciousness.
Hmm. Yeah. I was very young when Roots came out. And, it's one of the few memories that have kind of been burned in my brain regarding television and the power of television at that time. And to really open my world to, it's kind of one of the early, first early history lessons I have of the United States with Roots, amazingly enough.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I'm just so when you because it was brought up in the documentary, but to when you were presented with the project, it sounded like you were just in a state of mind to want to do something like this. That this just fell right in your wheelhouse in terms of what you wanted to do with your career at the time.
I wanted to do something meaningful,
Mhm.
right? I had just had this experience where um, uh, I played a role in a piece of storytelling that, as I said, it changed the nation, it changed
Mhm.
the country, and the story went on to be told around the globe. Kunta Kinte has become a symbol of the indomitability of the human
Mhm.
spirit around the world. Um, so yeah, I was looking for something that had some weight to it,
Yeah.
that made a contribution.
Yeah.
Um,
And did you feel that same way going into Reading Rainbow as well?
no, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's what it felt like to me,
Oh
that
yeah.
this was an opportunity to use this very powerful medium in a very positive way.
Yeah.
It made a lot of sense.
Yeah. So shifting over or transitioning, the in the documentary, the producers talked about season two, you sported a mustache,
Mm-hmm.
and that they begged you
Ruffled a
to,
little few feathers,
yeah,
caused some eyebrows to be raised.
yeah. So what was, I don't. If I say what were you thinking, I don't want to make that sound like that. But what was there on your personal part? There must have been some kind of thought behind that, and
I
something
wanted to grow
important
a
you wanted to say.
mustache. It was nothing more thought provoking about it than that. I simply wanted to grow a mustache, and then a couple of years later, I got my ear pierced, and I changed the style of how I wore my hair. My point was, it doesn't matter what I look like. It doesn't matter if I have an earring or not. You know, I felt like I was engaged in a relationship with
Mhm.
an audience, and I was bringing my authentic self. Now, granted, it was the part of myself that appeals to a 10-year-old, right? That you know, um, but myself nonetheless. And so we had those conversations. The,
Yeah.
the
I mean, I'll say that, the discussion I have with my friends, especially in the entertainment field,
Mhm.
there's this phrase that's been going around. It's the idea that authenticity is the currency of today, and I believe it had to have been back then too. Is you couldn't necessarily be that to have that corporate, that Hollywood look, but that it was so important to be authentic to your audience.
Well, my understanding of children's television and what it means to communicate to kids was and has always been based around the need and necessity to speak to them from a place of authenticity.
Hmm.
I
I mean,
never
okay.
wanted to pander to kids. I never wanted to talk down to them. I treat kids as human beings, um, small and
Mhm.
young human beings, but human beings nonetheless that deserve respect.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the philosophy I had with raising my daughter was I'm just going to be me.
Yeah.
She's going to see, you know, I'm not gonna hide who I am,
Right.
and I don't want her to hide who she is,
And I
and just
think kids really need to have relationships with adults that are based on respect,
hmm
mutual respect. Um, however that looks. I remember when my daughter Mika started going to school and we chose what we felt was the right school for her. However, they had a policy whereby all of the kids called all of the teachers and the administration of the school, the head of school, everybody was referred to by their first names. Now, I didn't grow up in that world,
yeah.
right? You called, adults Mr. and Miss and or Mrs. and that was it. I mean, because it was a sign of respect. But as they explained to me, they wanted their students, their pupils to grow up with a level of familiarity with
hmm
adults that sort of leveled the playing field.
yeah.
Yes, it's an imbalanced power dynamic, but there are things that you can do to mitigate that in the mind of a child that gives them agency to participate in the dynamic
Mhm.
freely and easily. And
Yeah, again, we underestimate kids. We under
exactly.
Oh yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Let's see. Okay, so near the end of the documentary, not to spoil anything, but the thing I admired about reading Rainbow, not having necessarily been an active watcher of it at all, but it was the idea that everyone from you to the producers to the crew held on to this mission, this vision of what the show was going to be. And it appeared at the end of the run that was almost to your detriment in the sense of, there's no marketability, there's no merchandise that could come with reading Rainbow. And I think, I kind of miss that idea of no, what's more important is the values of the show, of the mission of the show. I would imagine no one was ever tempted to make a plush or or fall into the merchandising realm. Do you kind of,
There were conversations. There were
yeah.
conversations about how can we work in, right?
hmm
An animated character. I mean, those conversations when because funding was always an issue, right?
hmm
Funding was always an issue, and in terms of exploring ways to continue production funding, you look at those other models that are out there in the world and in the commercial world, it's quite clear how you raise revenue.
hmm
You sell something.
Yeah.
Um, we really had nothing to sell except
Yeah.
for the
But can you
idea.
talk to the importance of holding on to that mission and the values of the show?
Well, for me, and I'm sure that the rest of the crew would agree, it was it was really about the mission,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
We were committed to doing exactly what it is we did, um, in the best way imaginable. And we really relied upon the kindness of strangers to help us. And
Mhm.
people did, right? Because we were children's television. Now, I will say that in the beginning, in the very beginning, it was very difficult to get the publishers to answer our phone calls. But once they figured out that if they had a book on the show, their sales skyrocketed. Then they couldn't throw books at us fast enough. And I think the goodwill of people everywhere we went, um, was really because they got a sense of what the mission was too.
Well, thanks. Can I ask you a Star Trek question?
Yeah, sure.
All right. So, uh, Picard season three.
Mm.
My friends and I, my old school Star Trek Next Generation friends and I, however we feel about the current Star Trek project, we were floored by Picard season three, because I think we felt like it was the closure we've been wanting on your crew, on your cast for a very long time. When
35
you were
years.
presented with Star Trek 3, I imagine there were attempts to bring the crew back together, but when you were presented with Terry Metalis' script and idea, did you have that same feeling of bringing the gang back together and then
It,
closing
it
it out? Did you have that same
it
feeling?
was the way it made sense from my first phone call with Terry. And I knew I knew that Jonathan and Marina and Brent had been in previous seasons of Picard. Um, and I knew that Terry had an intention to put the band back together. And he came to each and every one of us and asked, what would you like to see um, happen with your character? Do you have any thoughts, any input, any wishes, any desires? And he wrote all of it in there. It's all in there. It's all in
Yeah.
there.
I would imagine
Um,
that it was just as emotional for you guys as it was for us, that those final episodes.
yeah, without question, without
Yeah.
question. It was as if we had never left, as if we had just the day before, um, had our spacesuits on. We fell immediately into a rhythm that was established a long time ago. It was a blast. And Terry wrote a love letter to Next Gen and gave
Yeah.
us that closure we never thought we would get. That ship had sailed
Mhm.
as far as we were concerned. And it was just a great gift.
Yeah. Well, you have to know that there are a lot of us fans out there who really loved and felt very emotional about Picard season three, and want to thank you for that.
We felt the same way as a cast.
All right. Well, I am honored to talk with you. Your documentary, Butterfly in the Sky, about reading Rainbow, is on video on demand. And thank you so much for speaking with me, LeVar.
Thanks, Alan. My pleasure.